Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to another episode of Account in Telikilaas. My name is Ali Rashid. I'm from Hiridandu School. Today our topic is clubs and societies. Clubs and societies are by default non-trading organizations. Their primary objective is not to make a profit, but rather to provide services to the club members. Students, this is your second lesson on the topic clubs and societies. If you can recall, your previous lesson was conducted just before the lockdown. In that lesson, you were introduced to the topic clubs and societies. You learned about the nature of clubs and societies, that they are not uh, trading organizations. You also learned some of the most important terms used in the accounting system of clubs and societies. You also did a receipt and payment account to calculate the closing bank balance at the club. You were also introduced to the important term subscription. Subscriptions are the amounts of money that the club collects from the members for the services provided by the club. Subscription is the main source of income, and it is a very important part of the accounting system in the club as well. Now students, let's have a look at today's learning intentions. One of the objectives of today's lesson is for you to understand the nature of income and expenditure account. Income and expenditure account is an equivalent to the income statement prepared by sole traders and partnership businesses that you might have already done by now. And then I'll also be teaching you the refreshment income statement, the trading section of it, and at the end we will be doing a practical question where you will be preparing an income and expenditure account, which is the most important part of the club's accounting system. Students, how do we define an income and expenditure account? As the name suggests, income and expenditure account compares what the club earns against what the club spends. In other words, the gains of the club are matched against the expenses, and if the club has more income or more gains than its expenditures, the club makes a surplus, which is equal to a profit for sole trader or partnership business. And if the club has more expenditures than its earnings, or if the club has spent more than it has earned, then it is a deficit to the club, which is the same as a loss to the sole trader or partnership businesses. Now students, there are four important points that you will have to remember when you do an income and expenditure account. The first of those four is that income and expenditure account requires all the expenses and incomes to be adjusted for accruals and prepayments. You cannot take incomes and expenses as they are received or as they are paid. The totals will not come into the income and expenditure account, but rather an adjusted figure of expenses and incomes that are relevant to the current period will only be recorded in the income and expenditure account. Also, you will have to remember that capital receipts and capital expenditures will not be recorded or will not be included in the income and expenditure account, because we deal with revenue receipts and revenue expenditures only. For example, purchase of a non-current asset will not be coming in the expenditure section, and also the money received from selling furniture will not be included, but rather payment of groundman's wages or rent of premises, or the other revenue receipts or revenue expenditures will be included in the income and expenditure account. Also, you will have to remember, students, that non-monetary items such as depreciation of non-current assets are also included in the expenditure section of the income and expenditure account. Now students, let's have a look at a past paper question here. If you observe through the past paper, you will know that all the clubs and society questions will have these four sections as highlighted in green here: the receipt section, the payment section, the opening balances, and the closing balances. These four sections are very important in order for you to tackle through the required questions that are always asked in the clubs and society questions. For example, the first question asked here is calculate the subscription amount that is related to current year. So in order to do that, you will have to check the receipt section and find the total subscription 6,100, and then you will have to go to the balances and check if subscription was accrued or if subscription was prepaid at the beginning of the year and then at the end of the year. So students, always remember that these four sections, the receipt, the payment, and the opening and closing balances, these four sections are very important when you do clubs and society questions for your O levels. Now students, let's have a look at a subscription account in order to calculate the subscription that is actually relevant to current year. Now the subscription account has some special features. One of those features is that subscription account could have two balance BDs and two balance CDs. Now in this question we have two balance BDs. One on the debit side you find 360 accrued balance BD. Why is accrued balance BD on the debit side, students? This is because these are subscription that are due, that the club has already earned but not yet received. So this is equal to trade receivables, which is the same as money that the club has owned but not yet received. So anything that is equivalent to trade receivables will be treated like a current asset, right students? So trade receivables has a debit balance. Likewise, accrued subscription at the beginning of the year also has a debit balance because it's a current asset to the business. Now, on the other hand, you have subscription at the beginning of the year which has been paid in advance into this year. Opposite to those members who decided not to pay subscription for the time being, this 450 is paid in advance by some of the members. So this 450 the club hasn't yet earned because the club hasn't provided the services that are equal to 450 to the members. That's why this 450 is money that the club hasn't yet earned but has received. So this 450 is equal to a trade payable because the club hasn't yet earned this money. That's why it is coming on the credit side as a current liability. Now another important amount in the subscription account is the bank amount that you take from the receipts section, the total amount of subscription received during the year, 6,180. This is not necessarily the amount of subscription actually relevant to current year because this 6,180 could include subscription related to last year, current year, and next year as well. That's why we need to make adjustments. To make adjustments, when we look at the end of the year, we find 270 of the subscription that is paid in advance for the coming period. That means students, in this account what is happening is, to the 6,180 the total subscription we received, we are making adjustments. Whatever is related to current year, we are adding it by putting it on the credit side, the same side as the bank amount, and whatever is not related to current year, we are deducting by putting it on the debit side. So now if you look closely, now when we balance this account, we get the balancing figure as income and expenditure account 6,000. How did we get this, students? 6,180 plus 450, that is the total on the account. Then we deduct 360 and 270 from it in order to arrive at 6,000. So this means 6,000 is the amount of subscription actually related to current year. Then we take this 270 as the balance BD for the beginning of the next period. Now students, let's have a look at an alternative way to calculate subscription related to current year. Now this is a vertical format method which will reduce your confusion about debit side, credit side, balance BD, accrued, prepaid. These confusions can be avoided if you go for the vertical method. And if in the question it is not specifically mentioned to prepare a subscription account, I would suggest that you go and use the vertical format because it's easy to understand, and also it is more likely that you get the final figure correct if you use the vertical format. Now we do the same thing as we did in the account. We adjusted the total amount 6,180 to whatever is related to current year, and we deducted whatever is not related to current year. Agree? So we do the same thing here. Uh, we have the opening balances. From the opening balances we take prepaid 450, which if you can recall, uh, in the account also the 450 and 6,180 came on the same side. Agree? Now here also we are adding 450 prepaid at the beginning of the year. Students, why are we adding it? Because when members pay subscription at the beginning of the year in advance, it means it is to this year. Agree? It is a part of this year's subscription. That's why we are adding the 450. On the other hand, on the opening date, if we have subscription accrued, it means these are the subscriptions that the members must have paid last year but did not pay. So at the beginning of the year, if you find accrued subscription, it means it is related to last year. That's why we are deducting it. And then towards the closing balances, we check whether there is an accrued balance, but there is no accrued balance at the end of the year. It is not given. What happens if a subscription was accrued at the end of the year, students? It means at the end of this year, subscription related to this year is not paid. If we had accrued CD or closing accrued balance, we would have added it. Because we deducted the opening accrued, we will add the closing accrued if we had it, but in this question it's not there. Then we check if there's a prepaid at the end of the year. Now there's 270 prepaid at the end of the year. What does this mean, students? At the end of the year, if members are paying in advance, that means they are paying it for the coming year, for the next year. That's why it is not related to this year, so we deduct it. So now when we do the calculation, we get 6,000, the amount that will go into the income and expenditure account as subscription related to current year. The same thing happened in the account. When you adjusted the amounts, you got 6,000 as the amount of subscription actually related to current year. Now students, on we go to the second part of the required questions, that is preparation of refreshment income statement. What is a refreshment income statement, students? Sometimes even though clubs are primarily non-trading organizations, they might still have a small trading business within the club to serve the club members. One such example is a refreshment, a small cafe or a restaurant or something like that, where members can have drinks or snacks for their entertainment. And then if the club is running a business, no matter how small that is, if it is a trade in business, refreshment or a cafe or whatever it is, if it is a trade in business, the club has to prepare an income statement to show whether the club makes a profit from that particular part of trading. So that's why we have a refreshment income statement. We want to calculate whether the club makes a profit from selling refreshments to club members. So in order to do that, we go to the receipt section and check if there are sales of refreshment. Now we find 3,100. Then we check the payments and see if purchases were made. Obviously, in order to sell refreshments, you will have to make purchases. So that you can take from the payment sections. And then towards the balances, you will find the opening inventory and the closing inventory of refreshment that you will use in the income statement, a small trading section of the income statement for the refreshment that the club keeps. Now students, any income statement, you will know the format already. It is going to start with the sales and follow the normal format. So we go through the balances and check for any sale of refreshment, and we find in the receipt section that there is sale of refreshment 3,100. Now we go and write that in the income statements to start it off. Now the question, there's an interesting question here students. Will the sales figure always be available in the receipt section, or is there anything that can actually change the amount of sales? The answer is trade receivables. What happens if trade receivables were there for refreshment students? What happens is at the end of the year, if we had trade receivables, that means unpaid amounts for refreshment, that means it is a part of sales. Agree? So we will have to add the clause in trade receivables to the receipt figure. And if we have trade receivables at the beginning of the year, that means when this year began, there were trade receivables for refreshment of last year. So we will have to deduct whatever trade receivables was there at the beginning of the year. So what's the formula for getting sales, students? If trade receivables, if you find trade receivables in the questions for refreshment, then make sure that you take the receipt amount and add the clause in trade receivables because it is a part of this year's sales. Then you deduct the opening trade receivables because it is a part of last year's sales. Now in this question you do not have trade receivables, so you are safe to take it straight from the receipt section and then use that 3,100. Now we go further into the cost of sales, and then we write the inventory. From the balance we take 280, and then purchase of refreshment from the payment section we can take straight. Now again the question pop-ups, students. Will the purchase figure always be what we find in the payment section, or is there anything that can change the purchases? The answer is the opposite of trade receivables, trade payables. If you find trade payables in the questions, that means a part of this year's purchases is accrued at the end of the year, so we will have to add closing trade payable. And likewise, if we have trade payables at the beginning of the year, we will have to deduct it. So in this question safely you can do because you do not have trade receivables or trade payables. So the sales will be straight from the receipt section and the purchases will be straight from the payment section. But remember students, if you have trade receivables, make sure you adjust the sales figure. If you have trade payables, you adjust the purchase figure. Now we add opening inventory and purchases, then we deduct the closing inventory just like you do in a sole traders business. Then you get the cost of sales, you deduct that from sales, you get the profit for refreshment. What does this mean, students? This means that the club ran a refreshment business and made a profit of how much? 480 through trading as a refreshment business. Now students, on to the most important part, the third part of required question, income and expenditure account. Income and expenditure account, as I mentioned, is the equivalent to a sole trader or partnership's income statement for the year. Now on to the income and expenditure account, students. As the name suggests, it has incomes and expenses. You just compare the two. If incomes is more, you have a surplus. If incomes is less, you have a deficit. So we go to the incomes and we take subscription. We prepared a subscription account, or we used an alternative method to calculate the subscription related to current year is 6,000. So we take that amount into the adjusted amount into the income and expenditure account. Then students, then we have the profit from refreshment. We prepared an income statement for the refreshment trading section, and then from that we got that the club made a profit of 480 from the refreshment business. So that 480 will go as an income again to the income and expenditure account. Now students, you will have to know that in this question you just have subscription and the profit from refreshment as the incomes, but in other questions you might find other incomes such as donations made by club members, or if the club is holding competitions, if there are competition fees, that also becomes an income for the club. Now the total of income is 6,480. Now students, let's go and check the expenditure section. In the expenditure section, usually our payments will come as the expenses because most of the payments made through cash are expenses, both revenue and capital. But we mentioned at the beginning of the question that capital expenditures will not be included here. But there are some expenses that you cannot find in the payment section because some of the expenses are non-cash expenses. For example, depreciation of equipment. Depreciation of equipment is non-cash expense, and in the clubs and society questions usually the method for calculating depreciation is revaluation method. So in revaluation method, you have the opening balance and closing balance that you will compare, and then you will check if any equipment was bought or if any equipment was sold during the year. Now the question is stating clearly that no sale of equipment took place during the year. That means there's no reason other than depreciation that could reduce the value of equipment. Agree? So we have 6,000 at the beginning of the year. Then we go and check if we made any purchase of equipment. Then in the payments we find that equipment worth 2,000 was bought this year. So that means 6,000 plus 2,000, we should actually have 8,000 as the equipment value if it did not depreciate. But then the club decided at the end of the year the value of equipment will not be 8,000, but it will be revalued as 6,800. So the difference between the should have balance 8,000 and the actual balance 6,800 is the depreciation. So this is how we calculate depreciation: opening balance plus whatever equipment you bought. Then you compare that the should have been balance, that is 8,000, with the actual balance at the end of the year, that is 6,800. So 8,000 minus 6,800 gives you 1,200, which is the uh, equipment depreciation figure. Now students, what happens if we have sale of equipment? Then we just add that part, we just include that sale figure and minus it in the formula. This is how we will do if we have sale of equipment. Opening balance plus purchases, then we will deduct the sales figure because that reduce the value of equipment. Agree? Now when we deduct the sale of equipment, we must remember that what we deduct is not the selling price, but rather the value of the equipment that we sold. That we will deduct, and then we will compare with the closing balance and then find the depreciation. Now students, after the calculation of equipment depreciation, we go and look for more expenses, and what we find first is the purchase of equipment. And purchase of equipment, as we know, is a capital expenditure, so we will not be taking that into the income and expenditure account. And then we have repairs to equipment. Repairs is indeed an expense. Then we look for any accruals and prepayments at the beginning and end of the year, and we find none that is related to repairs, so we take 220 as the annual repairs to equipment figure. And then the next expense is insurance paid for 15 months. Now students, what happens when you have insurance or any other expense that is paid for more than 12 months? You understand that there are prepayments if it is for more than 12 months. So how do we calculate the amount that is paid in advance? We use the simple cross multiplication method that you use in mathematics. Insurance for 15 months is equal to 1350. So insurance for 3 months is equal to X. And then you cross multiply and you find that it is 270. So now we know that 3 months insurance is prepayment, which is 270. So we will have to deduct that from the actual amount paid. So insurance, the correct figure for this year will be 1350 minus prepaid 270. That's for 3 months. So it is 1080 for the current year. And then we have rent of premises that is paid for 11 months. Now here what is happening in insurance, it was prepaid, but in rent it is 11 months. That means 1 month's insurance is accrued. So how do we calculate that amount, student? We go and use the same method. Rent for 11 months is equal to 1430. So rent for 1 month equal X. Then we find out that it is 130. So 130 is accrued amount. So we add that accrued amount and we calculate the actual amount of rent relevant to current year is 1560. And then further we go and check general expenses. That also has no accruals and prepayments. So we just take that, and the total of expenditure is 6600. So that means this club has spent more than it has earned. Its expenditure exceeds its incomes. So income minus expenditure gives us a minus figure 120. That means that this club has a deficit of income because expenditures were more than income. So if the club has more incomes than expenditures, it will be a surplus. But in this question, there's more expenditure than income. So 120 is the deficit amount. Now on to the summary of the lesson, students. Uh, what did we learn today? You learned that income and expenditure account is an equivalent to sole trader or partnership's income statement, and it helps clubs to determine whether the club has a deficit or surplus of income. You also studied the refreshment income statement and how that helps to know whether the club makes a profit or a loss from refreshment trading. And then you did the most important part, the income and expenditure account, which compared the total earnings of the club with its expenditure. And in this question, in this lesson, we found out that expenditures were more, so the club made a deficit. If incomes were more, the club would have made a surplus. Now students, in our next lesson, I hope that I'll be meeting you with the statement of financial position of clubs and societies. You will also be learning how to calculate a surplus or deficit through the preparation of a statement of financial position, because in some questions you will not be asked to prepare an income and expenditure account, but rather you will be required to calculate surplus or deficit by means of preparing a statement of financial position. And we'll also be touching some of the important theory questions that are related to that are asked on clubs and society questions in your O-level papers. That will be all for today, students. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you learned about clubs income and expenditure account and its importance. Hopefully we'll meet inshallah next week with another lesson, the statement of financial position of clubs and societies. Meanwhile, you stay at home, you stay safe, be good to your parents, keep learning, keep exploring, keep asking your doubts from your teachers. I hope you have a great day today, students. Thank you very much once again. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.